From the University of Alaska Anchorage, this is Seawolf Voices, a podcast about the pathways to and from education. I'm your host, Matt Jardin. November is American Indian Alaska Native Heritage Month, and in a bit of serendipitous timing, this month is also when business alumnus Jason Hotch, a first-generation university graduate from the southeast Alaska village of Klukwan, stepped into his new position as Director of Native Student Services at UAA. In this episode, Jason talks about transitioning from working in business to education, resisting the need to rush things unless you absolutely want to, and making education more equitable for everyone. Jason, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and also congratulations. I know it's your first week on the job, so welcome.
Thank you. Excited, exhausted, busy, all the above.
Awesome. Well, let's just start there. So first off, can you tell me, what is Native Student Services? What kind of work is being done there? And what does your role as the new director of Native Student Services entail?
So Native Student Services, we are a department that we are set up to counseling, cultural events, advising, things like that, to assist our Alaska Native students and Indigenous population here on campus, and see them through hopefully a successful start as well as completion through higher ed. My role currently is oversight, program direction, and outreach. A lot of collaboration building across departments to aid those students, as well as the staff in, one, doing their job, two, the students having every available resource to them to succeed.
So you are pretty much the perfect person because you know exactly, what these kids need, what they're going through. Like myself, you are from Southeast Alaska.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm from Juneau, so.
Same. There
Awesome.
We go. Well, Haines, Klukwan, Juneau for a lot of it, but yep.
It's
sorry.
all close enough.
Go ahead.
It's
yep.
it's all Southeast.
It's all Southeast. It's a panhandle. So.
What was growing up like for you? And was education something you valued when you were younger?
So kind of back to that, I was born in Haines, but we lived in Klukwan, which is a very small village up in the Chilkat Valley. Absolutely gorgeous, but again, very small. I think currently the last population, it was 60 to 80 people. And then we moved to Juneau, and I continued through there, through high school. And then once I graduated high school, I was like, I got to go somewhere bigger. And that brought me to Anchorage. But, growing up, education was never a focus, not within my household. And so it wasn't part of the normal conversation, not that I recall, unless I was not doing well in school. And then, yeah, obviously, you get that conversation from the parents. But it didn't happen until later in life. When I moved up to Anchorage, it wasn't for college. It wasn't for anything. It was a very entry-level job that I enjoyed doing in my free time, and somebody offered to pay me to do it. That obviously did not pan out because you need to support yourself. But it took a best friend to encourage me to, hey, look into college. Is it something that you want to do? But then the conversation started with my grandmother, who was a massive proponent of education. She wasn't as vocal about it growing up. I don't know why. But after I'd moved away, it became a lot of the conversation. And she was very excited about me taking on college. And then when I started working here, way back when, those were all very positive things. And it was something that she had wanted for her grandchildren. She completed her high school education somewhere in her 40s. So this was a 40-year-old lady walking with a bunch of high schoolers for a diploma certificate. So I think the push for education was there. It was very quiet, but then it became vocal later in life. So long story, short story, whichever that is.
Because it's not too, not too overbearing or not too much pressure.
No, there was never you have to do this. And I kind of take a similar approach with my daughters. I highly encourage them because it's a massive tool, or feather in the cap, however you want to phrase it, to have a strong education as a base. Will it be college? Hope so. But plenty of other opportunities out there as well. But education is something talked about at home daily with homework. And obviously, my volunteer work with the board at their school, Rokoshula, and they see Dad works at a university. Dad works for our school. So the conversation is continual, I guess.
That's actually a perfect segue to one of my other questions. So I'm just going to jump ahead. So other than the position you're in now, you are pretty involved in education. Like you said, you sit on the board at your daughter's school. So why is it important for you to be a part of the educational community?
Hindsight, seeing what education has provided for me, the one, obviously my career. I've been in higher ed since 2004 when I started here over in the provost office, actually. And, I ran into professional difficulties when I was wanting to apply for another job. I'd done the tasks, but in California, I had a very strict, you have to have this degree, right? And even speaking with HR, I know you're qualified. I know you've done it in the past. You don't have the degree to get past stage one. And so seeing that, some of those challenges are there, that pushed me into completing my bachelor's degree through Colorado State Global. We were out in Joshua Tree, California, very remote. The nearest university was 2 hours away. Being a soon-to-be a father, commuting that much was not in any of my wants. And so, I found that university, and the upside was they were willing to accept all, most of my credits that I had earned through UAA. I'd reached out to UAA hoping to, hey, can I complete my degree via distance? I'm 90 plus credits in. Can I just wrap it up? And this was pre-COVID, so no, we can't do, graduation via distance kind of a thing. And
my things have changed, right?
how things have changed. Exactly. And so, but found the Colorado State Global, which is part of the CSU system, and it was awesome. It worked. Long days, but it worked. But, back to the question, why is it important? That was one, it removes barriers. And on top of that, setting an example and being present for my daughters, both of them knowing what education can do to them, what it can do for them, and being able to sit on, the board for the charter school, things like that. We review curriculum, we review policies around the school, things like that. And being able to have a voice for that on behalf of them and all the other students there as well. It's very meaningful. I don't know if they're fourth and second grade at the moment. Do they fully understand it? Probably not. But again, it's something, maybe later on they'll remember and take note of, things like that. But it's a K through 8 school, so we'll be around, and, I think it'll start to click later. So.
Yeah. Back on the distance thing, it's funny because I'm going after my graduate degree right now through our sister school, University of Alaska Fairbanks. And the program I'm in now, like you, pre-COVID, it was not online. And the only reason I'm able to pursue it now is because they had switched to an online format. So it's really amazing just what education, but also that availability of being online and distance can do to reach people, meet people where they are.
Exactly. And that's huge. And, going back to my example, full-time work and an accelerated degree program, and trying to get that wrapped up as quick as possible before my oldest showed up in this world was a big push, and it worked that much better for me. That format, I succeeded a lot better. And it's not for everyone, but it was for me. But yeah, seeing that transformation to what higher ed looks like, and we're still trying to figure out, I think, what that looks like on a daily basis. It's very different, but having that capability is huge. So I did enjoy it, and we'll see where it goes from there, even tomorrow.
Yeah. So you started at UAA, you got your associates at UAA. Can you tell me a little bit about what led you to start at UAA?
So I was only able to claim the associates because we couldn't complete the bachelor's via distance, but claimed that so that I wanted something that said UAA. I'd spent so much of my life here between work, between school, and studying. I lived between the admin building, the Rasmussen Hall, and the library. That was me, for years. But again, it was one of my best friends encouraged me. She was completing her undergraduate degree, and no, you need to do it. Look at it. Take a look at it. And all right, start with one class. Okay. Started. Okay, I can do this. This is fun. And it continued. The upside was I met some really good faculty members along the way, which is, I don't know if just luck or just, a testament to some of the faculty members that we have on campus, from my public speaking course, business law, things like that. My creative writing professor, who I actually just saw on my way over here, Professor Reardon, the impact that you can have when a class goes well, and the introduction from a friend and kind of pushing me to take that leap, because sometimes it is a leap, especially when you come from a household where it wasn't really pushed or, discussed. And so having that, okay, perfect. And then perfect storm, some really great professors like Don Reardon and, helping me stick to it. So
is there anything in particular that inspired you to pursue business as a major?
So I, like many college students, changed my major a few times. I started out wanting to do biology. I think I took one course and said, I'm not going to do biology. Nothing against them. My wife is a biologist. That's what she went to school for. And then I went into econ, which I absolutely enjoyed it. I just didn't see, after college with a econ degree, what was I going to do? I didn't see myself fitting that. My joke was I don't want to sit and stare at Excel spreadsheets all day. Then I got into fiscal work later and I stare at Excel spreadsheets all day. And then I went into marketing. I absolutely enjoyed that. It tied in with my job previously at the Hotel Captain Cook, working with our sales department, running the reservations department. Awesome. This is a ton of fun. After a couple courses, not for me. And so business then, I enjoy all of business. A business management degree, kind of fully encompass that. One thing I absolutely enjoy is working with personnel, people. And so business management, there we go. How do we get an entire team, department to row the boat in the same direction? That's how we succeed. And business management just made the most sense. I'd kind of covered a couple of the degree paths, and all right, let's just focus on that one and push through. So that's the short of how I end up in business management.
Awesome. I'm also management. I double majored management and marketing, so I understand.
So you get it.
Yeah. So you said growing up, you weren't super pressured into pursuing an education, but you did anyway. And I saw that you are a first generation college graduate. So what did it mean for you to be a first generation college graduate?
That being, my immediate family members, I was the first gen graduate. Mom completed high school and that was it. And she was good with it. And that was fine. Father took some coursework, but never graduated. Extended family, we've got plenty. So I guess kind of the example was there. A lot of family members went through Michigan State University. And I think I got more questions about what are you going to do after you graduate high school from that group. But again, it was never really pressured from the immediate family members. Dad posed the questions, well, what are you going to do after you graduate? Me being 17, 18, I don't know, kind of a thing. But again, I think it really hit home on being a first gen graduate again, going back to setting an example, my oldest daughter, Rory, was about 8 months at the time. So have my firstborn daughter in the crowd at graduation, it meant the world to me. And knowing that the photos, the recordings, all that are things that she can look back on and, hey, are those, that's something I want to do, if that's what she chooses. And so in addition to that, knowing that my grandmother, one of her big pushes and hopes was that I would continue education, knowing the power that it has. So having that degree meant just about the world to me. So still does, and in multiple facets.
Mm-hmm. Are there any lessons or experiences from your time in school that you still draw upon today?
It looks different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't, kind of pigeonhole everyone into the same box. I have a running joke, it took over, 7-8 years to actually wrap up my undergraduate degree. I should be a doctor, right? But very non-traditional. I was working full time. I was the only one up here, and so supporting myself and taking college when I could. So lesson kind of teaching is, don't get stuck in we need to do it in this way. We need to graduate in 4 years. It's great if you can, but know that that's not the only path. Don't delay either. It gets a lot harder the older you get, just at least personal opinion. But on top of that, some of the collaboration. And I look back at my capstone project where it was a team effort, and you look at this was basically COVID, pre-COVID. I'm in Southern California. I've got 2 of my team members are spread out through Colorado, one in Wyoming, and one a little further north in California. And how to make something a success when we're spread out all over the place, right? So back then it was like, man, this is a challenge, and now it's almost commonplace, right? How many of us are meeting via Zoom, camera on, camera off, whatever, or a lot of ours were just phone calls, group phone calls. So I guess those are probably the things that have stuck with me is how to collaborate in a technological world, even before we got pushed into Zoom every day of the week. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, between those items, I would say those are the ones that stick out the most to me.
So you got your undergrad in business, and you were working in the business sector for a while, and then you made the transition to UAA into education. What inspired you to make that transition from business into education?
I managed hotels. Goodness. I was 16 working at the Gold Belt Hotel in Juneau, which I think it's now another name. And I enjoyed that. First job was at Foot Locker in Juneau. You're from Juneau. Mm-hmm. You remember when it was still used to be there. I was 15, and, so I've been working since then.
Is it not at Nugget Mall anymore?
No,
it's been a while since I was
there's not much left in the Nugget Mall.
Oh my goodness.
So it's sadly long gone. But so enjoying customer experience, customer satisfaction, and management, at the Captain Cook, things like that. Moving to UAA was one, it saved down on travel time, mm-hmm. Running from downtown to class and vice versa. There was also the tuition credits, hard to argue against those when you're an employee, and, you get it done with a lot less debt, huge thing. But then the longer I was in it, seeing the success of others, it massively rewarding for me. So volunteering for commencement, things like that, man, that is just a phenomenal day. If anyone listens and, says, oh, maybe I should volunteer, do it. Seeing the excitement, the happiness, and the longstanding, man, I've put 4, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, however long it takes you to get that degree done. But that is a massive achievement. Mm-hmm. And so being around that is great.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love seeing success stories. Hopefully, can aid in some of those success stories now in this new position a lot closer. And yeah, I mean, that's probably what's kept me around higher ed, even when I worked at the community college there in Joshua Tree, California. So much smaller scale, smallest community college in all of California, but a lot closer relationship to those success stories.
Mm-hmm.
Great to see.
Before we end, I just wanted to bring up an earlier podcast episode that we did where I had Michelle Yachmanov on, who is UAA's Executive Director of Alaska Native Outreach and Education. In that episode, she mentioned the impact of visibility, how important it is to see people that look like you in certain positions. And, I think that's something that a lot of people that aren't in marginalized communities kind of take for granted. Like for me, it was a huge deal when I saw someone that looked like me, brown, Asian, Filipino, like in a leadership role. So kind of expanding on that, do you think there are any other considerations that we need to be cognizant about when it comes to setting students up for success and making education equitable for everyone?
We're never perfect. There's always tweaks we can make. But I have to agree, visibility on many fronts, not just seeing someone that looks like you, but seeing, things, there's a naming of buildings, street road names, going back to Haynes, where I was born, they've replaced a lot of street names with traditional Tlingit names and the signage to go with it, or they're starting that process. That's awesome. That's huge. That becomes a talking point, to not only increase the visibility of Alaska Native Indigenous individuals, and for me, conversation's the big thing. Let me teach you about me. Let me teach you about where I'm from, and I think that can be said by any of the marginalized communities, and being seen. That's probably much like Michelle had said, and you just reiterated, is be seen. I really hope that is something that myself and my team in NSS can do within our program, is be seen. We've got a great community. I have very passionate employees, which is phenomenal. I don't know if I can come into a better situation like that. And just be seen, open, kind of a open door thing, come see what we're about. And then the conversation goes from there. And, learning a new word, seeing what, traditional values, events, things are, what do those look like? We're UA as a whole is a massive community. It's a commuter community, very much a lot of, full-time working employees and things like that, still taking courses. So it's a little harder to capture that audience and hey, look, but hopefully we can get there. And how we go about that, I don't know. This is probably one way. This is something somebody can sit and listen to on their car ride on the way into class, or from work, whatever it may be. And hopefully questions come from the visibility. It's an educational moment and learning moment, things like that.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Seawolf Voices is a production of the University of Alaska Anchorage Office of Advancement and Alumni Relations.